In this lesson, we're going to be talking about and demonstrating how to paint the effects of light as opposed to just copying what we see from the photograph. And that entails thinking in terms of color temperature, pushing the shadows cooler, the lights warmer, also the consistency of the paint, keeping the lights thicker so they have more impact, they look more sunlit, and keeping the shadows maybe a bit thinner, not nearly as thick as the lights. And also think about the value contrast. Really push the difference between the darks and the lights to increase that impact of sunlight. Now this is the image we're going to be using. It's a farm in middle Missouri. All those states in the Midwest, Illinois, Missouri, Iowa, they all have great farms, barns, a lot of land between them. So it's a great place to go for subject matter. And the first thing I want to do, especially when I get an image like this, is decide what it is that draws me to it, or what drew me to take a picture or do a plein air sketch. And it's this area in here. That's what draws me to it. So I want to get rid of, first of all, a lot of the foreground, some of the sky. And that zooms me in a little bit more. It allows me to have all the buildings in there. But that's not always a good thing. Sometimes you want to crop out some of the buildings. I don't find this one as interesting. I think this gives some overlapping in front of the background barn, so I don't want to get rid of it. Plus, I still have a lot of foreground in there that I want to get rid of, so I'm going to zoom in again. And that tightens it up a bit more. It cuts off some of this building, cuts off some of this one, and then my focal point is more front and center. It's bigger, more interesting. Not so much foreground. Now I want to think about the composition. Do I want this square? If the buildings and trees were taller and they filled up things this way, then that would be a more square composition. But things are more horizontal. They lay this way. So I want a longer composition. I don't have a lot of real tall things. I have more sky and foreground still. Even zooming in this much, there's still a long view of the barns, not a tall one. So I don't want a vertical shape or a square shape. So I want more horizontal, a longer shape. So I went ahead and cropped it down to this. I cut out that barn on the left over here and opened up the right side a little bit, but this is still my focal point right in here. And it's off center. Center's about in here somewhere. If that is center, then I'm off center of my focal point just to the left, which is good. I want it off to the left, either below half or above half on the right or left side. I don't want things too centered in the middle. So that's my thought process for the center of interest, how to compose. Now I want to think in terms of pushing the color to suggest more the idea of sunlight. And again, by doing that, I want to keep all these shadow areas in here and always be aware of where the sunlight's coming from. That sounds like an easy thing, but too often, like I'll look in here at this door and it's pretty light, or a few spots in here or a spot in there that looks real light, and I won't be conscious of where the sun comes from, and I'll make those areas way too light, and they'll look like a second light source is hitting them. So everything in that shadow area has to be dark and cool. So I'm going to think value-wise, everything's going to be at a certain level of darkness and everything's going to be cool. So even if I start out this painting by getting the shadow part of the trees, all this in here, the shadow part of the barns, everything that's not catching sunlight, I want to really push the temperature cooler. Whether it's a blue-green for the trees, a blue-violet, or a gray-blue, or a gray-blue-violet, or gray-violet for the shadow of the barns. I want to start with a cool color for the shadows. I can always modify it, gray it slightly, but I want everything to stay in there real cool, especially in the block in. After the block in, I can go back and have some broken color in here. I can add some warmer colors, but that overall block in of a cool color will keep it from getting too warm. Because there are some warmer colors in here that keeps these shadows from looking just straight blue. But that blue still has to predominate. So that's why it's real important to get that overall cool color first in the shadows, even if it's too strong. You know, it's just blatantly too violet, too strong. That's, at least it stays in the shadow. You've achieved that goal of keeping the shadow cool. And remember, these are exercises, and you want to work in terms of goals, being able to keep shadows cool, sunlight areas warm in this lesson. So it's not making a good painting or copying the photograph, which is real easy to fall into. And then I lose track of my thought process of keeping shadows cooler, sunlight areas warmer, and I end up trying to match a color, and I lose that effect of light, lose that punch. So keep that separate. Same thing in the light areas, everything in the light area. Even the sky, it's a sunlit space. I want to keep all those on the yellow, yellow-orange, orange, red-orange, yellow-green side. Everything that's predominantly more yellow, which would include orange. Orange is yellow and red, even though I can have a red-orange, and that's pretty warm also. Predominantly more yellow to yellow-orange. I want to add that to everything in the sunlight. Even the barns, which are kind of a bluish color. You know, if you think of local color of the barn here is a grayish blue. But the orange still has to predominate in that blue to make it look sunlit. Now, not always. Once in a while, you'll have in areas where, like maybe the roof in here, well, even in the roof, it's going to be predominantly more yellow ochre and yellow orange than it is blue. But you know, if you have a bright blue car in the sunlight, it's going to be more blue, but you want to paint it in such a way compared to the shadow that it looks warm. So if I can have a grayish blue area in the sunlight, have it warm enough so that when I put it next to the real cool color temperature of the shadow, the bluish violet, then it looks warmer in the sunlight. So in other words, I can have some violets in this yellow grass as long as compared to the shadow, the grass looks warmer. But in the block end, keep everything pretty separated. Real warm in the shadows, real cool in the sunlight. You can still gray things, but really push that temperature. And if that means not graying it as much, then don't worry about graying it. But really get used to the idea of pushing that temperature between the shadow and the sunlight. Shadows being cooler, darker, sunlit areas being lighter, warmer. Then there's the thing that breaks down to the sunlight on the trees is going to be darker than the sunlight on the grass because they're two different planes. And the shadow in the trees will be darker than the shadow on the barn. So you have to compare. Once you get into the shadows, you decide which ones are darker, which ones are lighter, but they're all going to be darker than the sunlight. Nothing in the shadow is as light as the sunlight. So keep that in mind, that that's the focus, the goal of the lesson, the outcome of the painting.